So the next presentation, inshallah, in the retreat is by Dr. Ahmed Arafat, and it is entitled Keeping Your Faith in a High-Tech Age, Challenges and Opportunities. And mashallah, Dr. Ahmed Arafat, he holds a PhD from the University of Chicago, and he has been a part of the larger Muslim community for several years now, mashallah. If you could have everyone, inshallah, settle down and start to make your way into the masjid. And if you would like to continue your conversations, inshallah, you can continue them outside of the masjid in the courtyard. But if you would like to be a part of the main session, inshallah, please make your way down and quiet down, inshallah.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, we're very grateful and honored to have with us today Dr. Ahmed Arafat, who is now the resident scholar at Mecca Center. He graduated from Jamiat al-Azhar and he holds a PhD from the University of Chicago. We're very grateful to have Dr. Arafat here with us today. Please, if you can make your way to the main hall and avoid talking in the lobby so that we can pay attention to the talk, then inshallah we can all benefit. Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah wa taba'a hudah wa ba'd. I'd like to thank the organizers of this great retreat for inviting me, and I'd like to thank everyone also for attending. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you, bless your time, your families, and your knowledge. Allahumma ameen. I was asked to talk about how faith is influenced by our modern high-tech technology. Whether you know it or not, our faith is subconsciously influenced by the environment around us. Sometimes we come to the masjid with a specific expectations. For example, people, if they don't get their dua answered immediately, they think there is something wrong because they are living in a world that is, everything is done quickly. It's fast service. So they come to the masjid with that mindset. Fast food, fast service, everything is done fast. They come to the masjid with that mindset. When they pray and they do not get their dua answered immediately, they think this ibad service. So this is what people subconsciously have in mind, and it is really negative in forming our faith. So when we understand what dua is for and what it indicates about our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would help us bounce back from these subconscious influences. Same thing happens when it comes to advances. The more we advance, the more our faith gets influenced. So, do we still need God? This is a question that could arise as we see the great changes happening around us, especially when it comes to more power, more technology, more independence. This raises the question, even if this question is raised subconsciously, still it has an influence on our faith and how we practice. Sometimes this question is in the youth mind, even if they do not voice it. And we need to be proactive and address these kind of questions and not silence them or suppress them. Do we still need God? This question comes, as I said, with the problem of more. The problem with more. There are a lot of theological implications for this. I want you to think about these ayat for a moment. You will find that these ayat exactly depict the struggles some youth are going through. The problem of more. The mushrikun at the time of the Prophet ﷺ rejected the message of Islam. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُنَا بَيِّنَاتٍ قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَيُّ الْفَرِيقَيْنِ خَيْرٌ مَقَامًا وَأَحْسَنُ نَدِيًّا. Their argument for denying faith and not embracing Islam is that they were raising this question: which of the two, which of us is better in status and superior in assembly? This is an idea of appealing to your prestige and your power and your human capabilities to say, I reject faith. And some people could say, how could they be wrong and they have achieved all of these great scientific discoveries? How could they be wrong theologically? This question, we'll see that Imam al-Ghazali, who died 505 of Hijrah, dealt with this question. Also, the people of Ad had more of power. That is why it was easy for them and tempting for them to reject the message of the Prophet. Of course, this is all wrong arguments and wrong way of reasoning, but this is the problem with more and how we can encounter that, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَمَّا عَادٌ فَاسْتَكْبَرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَقَالُوا مَنْ أَشَدُّ مِنَّا قُوَّةً. The people of Ad were arrogant and they rejected the message of Allah. What was their argument? Here it's not rational reasoning. This is not rational reasoning. This is beyond rational reasoning. It is something that relates to the human nature. So they had more power. That is why they thought they do not have to embrace the religion. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَ الْمَلَأُ مِنْ قَوْمِهِ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَكَذَّبُوا بِلِقَاءِ الْآخِرَةِ وَأَتْرَفْنَاهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا مَا هَذَا إِلَّا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. Another reason why people rejected the message of the prophets, the chiefs of his people who disbelieved and denied the meeting in the hereafter, and to whom we have given luxuries and comfort of this life. I want you to underline that sentence. To whom we have given luxuries and comfort of this life. This is something foundational in denying faith. Again, sometimes when we talk about why people are away from Allah, it's not always rational arguments. It is not always rational arguments. Here in these ayat, we see different emotional foundations for rejecting faith, different social foundations for rejecting faith, because they think they have greater status, they have more power, their life is very comfortable. They feel they do not need Allah. So sometimes when we talk about the deen and we preserve the deen and protect the deen in the minds of our kids, it's not always about theological or rational arguments. We need to confront that emotional and psychological side of denying faith. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala dealt with this question long time ago. I think all of you know that he wrote The Incoherence of the Philosophers, right? He disagreed with the philosophers in three major questions. The philosophers, the Greek philosophers, thought that the world is eternal. It does not have a beginning. So Imam al-Ghazali had a problem with this. They thought that God knows only the particulars and he does not know the details of everything. Imam al-Ghazali had a problem with this. And they thought the idea of physical resurrection is illogical, and Imam al-Ghazali had a problem with this. So his job of the incoherence of the philosophers was not literally to attack philosophy, but more to address these three major questions and use the same kind of philosophical reasoning to turn many Muslims back to Islam. And this is what he's complaining here. He's basically saying in this long quote, and this is the introduction of his book, The Incoherence to the Philosophers. Many people did not read that introduction closely, but it refers to that psychological foundations for keeping faith away. And here we see Imam al-Ghazali saying, those people, their only problem was they were influenced by the great statements attributed to Aristotle, Plato, and they made a conclusion. They thought those people had a great tradition in geometry, mathematics, and some scientific statements, and they believed that these things are accurately true. So that means that their theological perspectives is similarly true, and that brought doubts into their faith. This question is raised nowadays. Those non-Muslims, they made all of these things. They are scientifically fine. How could they be theologically wrong? That question sometimes is raised in our minds, and this is the exact question Imam al-Ghazali was dealing with. He said we need to differentiate between these areas of knowledge. When it comes to theological reasoning, it's different than scientific discoveries. That is why he did make sure that in this introduction that he's not attacking science, he's not attacking geometry, he's not attacking math, because he acknowledged that these are true sciences and their conclusions are certain. But he's saying, when it comes to theological statements and positions, let's now reason rationally about this. And that is why he wrote The Incoherence of the Philosophers. I can give you a few seconds to read that. This is exactly the same thing we're talking about here. The idea that those Muslim philosophers were influenced by the current philosophical perspectives at that time. So the source of their unbelief in their hearing high-sounding names such as Socrates. All of these great philosophers, they had that psychological impact. He's talking now about some Muslim philosophers. He's not talking about the masses. He's talking about some Muslim philosophers who got into that trap psychologically. Now, they thought that since they are scientifically fine, then they should be theologically fine as well. So they started adopting their views about nature, about God, and they made that wrong assumption, exactly. They thought if they are scientifically fine, then they should be theologically fine. So why don't we believe in the eternity of the world like they do? They make many great scientific statements and they are true. Why do we doubt their theological statements like the world is eternal? Now if you ask NASA, the world is 13.7 billion years, right? NASA now proves Al-Ghazali was right. But Al-Ghazali was proving that the world is not eternal and the world is created using the same philosophical techniques. And he's saying, what those Muslim philosophers who were influenced by the Greek philosophers were doing were actually doing taqleed. Taqleed is blind imitation of those philosophers. And this is, he said, what philosophy is really not about. You should be reasoning independently. And he's asking Muslims to think independently, and this is an example of thinking independently. So because he said, if you follow Plato, if you follow Aristotle, what you're doing is not philosophy. This is taqleed. Let's do ijtihad in philosophy, basically. And this is what his way of turning many Muslims back to Islam. So I would invite you, especially students of knowledge, to go and read the introduction of Imam al-Ghazali. Now, are there any facts that would immunize us from this kind of psychological traps and illogical fallacies? The first thing to keep in mind is God's sunan, laws and patterns, that governs the rise and fall of nations do not favor anybody. Keep this in mind. If a nation took all the means towards scientific advancements, Allah will make their efforts successful, even if they are not Muslims. Allah's sunan do not favor anyone. If you do not take care of yourself health-wise, you will have a lot of consequences. Just because you're a Muslim does not mean the sunan of Allah will change. Allah made the world subservient, musakhar, for humans. If you do your best and use it to better human life, Allah will support that endeavor, even if you're not a Muslim. What is the budget that Muslims have in Muslim countries for education? I can easily claim that maybe Harvard University has a budget better than or bigger than what those states have. Even the Gulf countries cannot compete with the endowments of Harvard for supporting their education. So what do you expect? This is completely in line with Allah's sunnah. Muslims in the past, in the medieval period, took all the means to advocate for knowledge, and they had the upper hand. And many Christians religiously also suffered with the same questions. How could Muslims be true? The same exact question was raised back then. How could Muslims be true and be advanced and were not? They are advanced. Could they be true? Same question was raised. If you read Christian theological works at that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it clear in the Quran, من كان يريد الحياة الدنيا وزينتها نوفي إليهم أعمالهم فيها وهم فيها لا يبخسون. Whoever desires only this world life and its luxuries, we will pay them in full for their deeds in this life. Nothing to be left out for them in the afterlife. So this question is not about are they theologically right or not. We should not mix between the two. You took all the means to achieve great discoveries. Wait for support from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is part of Allah's plan, or for a better term, for Allah's qadar. Muslims from year 750 to the year 1100, they had the super hand when it comes to knowledge and transferring knowledge. The books of Al-Razi in medicine were taught in Paris for 600 years. Now, when you look at the Muslim world, how many universities do we have in the Muslim world? Around 500 universities. The US alone has 5,758 universities. So remember, it's not about who's being theologically right. This is Allah's sunan. Allah's sunan, Allah's social laws do not favor anybody. Allah's social laws do not favor anyone. All Muslim countries have 500 universities, but in America alone you have more than 5,000 universities. Israel spends 13% of its income on scientific research. What do Muslim countries do? It's almost nothing. Almost nothing. So when we feel backward, it's because we're away from Islam, not because of Islam itself. So again, just because you're adopting some Western ideas does not always necessarily mean you will be advanced. If you look at Liberia, for example, they adopt the American Constitution, but their poverty, their life is basically under poverty line. So it's more about al-akhdh bil-asbab, using all the legitimate means. If you do, to reach a scientific advancements, you will be supported. So keep this fact in life. God's sunan do not favor anybody. That would immunize you from falling into illogical assumptions or illogical traps. The second fact that I want you to keep in mind, that physical laws are descriptive, they are not prescriptive. Meaning they describe, they do not create. Why I am saying this? Because with this age of technology, people think, khalas, we do not know Allah. We know now how it works, and we discovered all the laws. That actually begs the question of the lawgiver. That does not negate the existence of Allah. It means actually that you need Allah more. Because these laws, they describe, they do not create. If I have a radio and I know the physics of the radio and how the radio functions, that doesn't mean that that radio does not have a maker. Actually, these sophisticated laws and the ability to identify the laws and discover the laws, the ability itself indicates that there is a lawgiver who designed this in a way that can be even deciphered. That is why Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Allah made it easy for you to recognize so you can make the right conclusion and say there must be a creator behind it. So just because you know the laws does not mean you do not need Allah. The opposite is true. The laws requires the lawgiver. Just because you know the laws does not mean there is no God. The opposite is actually true. And also, we do not make any confusion between acknowledging the causes and believing in the Lord of causes. There is a huge difference between acknowledging the causes and believing in the Lord of. These are not contradictory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created things in the way of asbab, in the way of causes. That doesn't mean that there is no creator, but this is Allah's qadar for creation and Allah's way of creation. And you see the Quran actually pointing out this idea of causes without risking any faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ حتى إذا أقلت سحابا ثقالا سقناه لبلد ميت فأنزلنا به الماء فأخرجنا به من كل الثمرات كذلك نخرج الموتى لعلكم تذكرون. So the Quran here is literally, and there are hundreds of ayat talking about the causes. And that does not necessarily mean you're risking the faith, because there is no contradiction between the causes and believing in the Lord of causes. So do not be, again, you might think, but this is obvious. But as I told you in the beginning, you could fall into these psychological fallacies easily. So keep yourself immunized with these ideas. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about how rain is done without risking the faith of the readers of the Quran. We acknowledge the causes, but we add to that that there is a Lord of all of these causes who controls these causes. These causes do not act dependently. They do not act, independently. They are dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is the one who controls these. Otherwise, you will be falling into what is called category mistake. Category mistake. When I say this color tastes good. No, it's not tasting good. This is category mistake, because you're ascribing to this property a quality that doesn't belong to it. So we do not confuse between the causes and the Lord of causes. The third, and this is very important, is that faith is fitrah. We have natural disposition to believe. Faith is here to stay. I remember one day I gave a khutbah about why faith is here to stay. And the reason why, because we're hardwired to believe. So make sure that you revive your fitrah all the time. Imam al-Razi, rahimahullah ta'ala, when he was talking about a debate between the prophets, he called it a debate. He said the Quran has many munadharat, many debates. One of these debates is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَتْ رُسُلُهُمْ أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٍّ. So those disbelievers were debating with the prophets about Allah and about following the deen. And the prophet's immediate reaction was, أَفِي اللَّهِ شَكٍّ. Is there any doubt in Allah? هذا سؤال إنكاري. يعني there is no doubt in Allah. There is no doubt. Why? Because it is fitrah. Imam al-Razi said, explaining this ayat, it's fitrah for many reasons. And he said, if you hit a child gently at the back, what would the child do? He said the child will immediately look back. And he's analyzing just this simple act. He's analyzing it. He said he will look back, and that indicates that every effect has a cause. So there has to be an ultimate cause for the creation of this world. So it is easy for the child to believe in Allah, because he does not have to learn that something that he does not have to learn the principle of cause and effect. He's born and he's hardwired with this principle. If we are not hardwired to think in a specific way, we can never develop any type of knowledge. There has to be the software first, when you can put the inputs and then you turn it into outputs. So our minds are already hardwired to believe. Why? Because we believe in some axiomatic things, some badahiyat. One of these badahiyat that does not need any proof is the principle of cause and effect. And he said, a child who didn't learn anything, you do not have to go to school to learn about cause and effect. So these axiomatic things and badahiyat are the things you do not need a school to teach you. So he said, faith is deeply rooted in our nature because it relates to fitrah. If you tap the back of the child, they will look back. Why? They believe in cause and effect. And that would easily lead them to believing in the ultimate cause. Why? Because التسلسل محال. Infinite causes, any regress of infinite causes is impossible. This is also one of the badahiyat. So the deen is based on badahiyat and completely logical and rational conclusions. These are the foundations of faith. That is why it will be here always to stay, no matter how advanced we are in technology and science, because we're hardwired to believe. Tasalsul muhal, infinite regressive causes is impossible. If I have this piece of paper and it requires a signature for it to be valid or to come into being, and I ask you to sign it and you say, no, you have to go to B to sign it, and B says, no, you have to go to C, and C says you have to go to D. If this is endless, do you think this paper will be ever signed? No. What if it got signed? That means that someone signed it and he's not dependent on anyone else. Same thing for the universe. If it comes into being, and I think we are existent, if it comes into being, that means there is a cause that did not need to be caused by anything else. And this is absolutely rational. This is the end of reason. After that, you develop faith. But faith is founded on absolute reason. Faith is not blind. Faith is very logical and rational. If there is infinite regressive causes, will never exist. But we exist, so there can never be infinite regressive causes. That's why if you read Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, what is the first statement in a book of Aqidah? What the first statement in a book of theology, what is it? Is it Allah exists? No. Is it Allah is one? No. What is it? Who can remind me? حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. This is the first thing Imam al-Nasafi starts his theology book with. حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. Basically, things are real. This is all real. He wants to start with this because if you believe that this is real and we really exist, you're halfway to believe in Allah. So those people were very accurate in the way they present knowledge, very sophisticated. He did not he started with these epistemological abhath before he talks about tawheed and all of that. So he started with حقائق الأشياء ثابت. Let's go back to Imam al-Razi. You tap the child, he looks back because he believes in cause and effect without going to school. What else? He said, this child will demand to be compensated. And that is a proof that he believes in the idea of compensation. And in this life, we're not compensated well. I mean, there is no absolute justice in this world. So we all longing naturally for the day when absolute justice will be administered. And he said, if this child is not compensated, he will keep crying. And that means that he believes in moral accountability. He expects the other person to be morally accountable for his deeds, and that brings in the idea of Sharia. And for Sharia, we need someone to give the laws and organize the laws. That's why we need all the prophets. So based on this act, he used what a child does to say this child is naturally prepared to believe. This is part of what the fitrah means. Now, the fourth and so this is the debate between the prophets and the messengers. The fourth fact you should keep in mind, maintain your essential nature of iftiqar. You're completely dependent on Allah. You know, once you forget this nature of you, you start making illogical conclusions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Iqra, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Indeed, man does transgress all bounds in that he looks upon himself as self-sufficient. Once you start feeling that you're independent, you do not need anyone. I have health insurance, I have the best education, I have my car, I have my house, I have a lot of money, I do not need anyone. Then if you're not protected by faith and you do not keep the things we mentioned before in the right perspective, you could end up transgressing all bounds and falling and making all of these illogical conclusions we talked about in the beginning. What do you need is iftiqar. Iftiqar, you are essentially needy. You are essentially needy. What do I mean by this? If you're created, that means you're needy. And you're created, so you must be needy. You might say, but I have good health. And I can ask you, do you need the health? Do you need the money? You're needy. Just because you have these skills does not mean you're sufficient. No, your need is essential. And that is why one of the exercises you should do is to say, لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله, and believe that you're needy. Do you need to breathe? You're needy. Just because you have the ability to breathe does not mean you're not needy anymore. Actually, you're more needy. Because you need all of these. So do not forget this intrinsic and essential quality of you, that you are needy. And use that to demonstrate your brokenness before Allah. And if you do, you now exemplified a great moral level. The level of iftiqar is one of the most beautiful, mature spiritual state that a Muslim could reach. And in order to do that, you have to be also grateful and acknowledge what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. If you read the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah al-Sakandari, you can easily sense his emphasis on the idea of iftiqar. And he uses iftiqar as one of the implications of tawheed. When I say tawheed, people might always think of theological arguments. But in order to protect our kids, we need tawheed beyond theological reasoning. We need tawheed beyond theological reasoning. And we need to emphasize the spiritual implications of tawheed. Ibn Ata'illah rahimahullah ta'ala, in his hikam, what is the first commentary on the hikam? It was the commentary by Ibn Abbad. In his introduction, he wrote a very beautiful sentence about long introduction, but I was struck by one sentence. He defined and identified the hikam as هذا كتاب في التوحيد على طريقة أهل الله. This is a book about tawheed, but according to the spiritual masters of the path of Allah. So this kind of tawheed will be what you see in the Quran. Tawheed that energizes reliance on Allah, that energizes knowing who you are and who Allah is, energizes tawakkul and trusting Allah, surrendering to Allah. This is what we mean by tawheed as lived by the spiritual masters of Allah. Ibn Ata'illah states your need, your iftiqar, your dependence belongs to you essentially. It is an essential quality of you. For accidents, these are logical terms, for accidents do not abolish essential iftiqar. The trials that arrive in this world are but reminders to you of what you ignore of your poverty or your need of Allah. So never be distracted by your skills. Even if you're the smartest, you're the richest, you're still faqir. You're still faqir. Maintain the iftiqar. It will immunize your heart from falling into the logical fallacies we talked about in the beginning. And that is why we fast. One of the bigger purposes and the prime purposes of fasting is the idea of developing iftiqar as well. You learn about who you are by staying away from eating and drinking for a few hours, to learn how you look like without Allah's providence. So do not forget who you are. Some people get angry and they do wrong things and say, oh, don't talk to them, he's fasting. It should be actually the opposite. That this fasting should make you more humble. This fasting should make you experience your iftiqar. It is not an excuse to be angry and abuse others. It is meant for developing that iftiqar. So the more we develop iftiqar, the irrelevant these challenges would be. And it would be actually an opportunity to thank Allah more for what He has given us. To thank Allah more for making it easy for you to come to the masjid and attend, even though you are maybe 50 miles away and you can come in few minutes. So it brings in that iftiqar. And what seems to be an obstacle to faith is now an opportunity to grow spiritually. I want to close with this beautiful ayah, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَا يَطْغَى, and putting it in context. I wrote my dissertation in the University of Chicago about the surah as an argument. Learning about the surah design by thinking of the surah as an argument, and I was taking Imam al-Razi's tafsir as an example. He is a theologian and he's reading the surah as argumentation. Now, let's put this ayah in the context. This surah is very beautiful. The beginning we all memorize, we all know. Read in the name of your Lord who created man out of mere cloth. Proclaim your Lord is the most bountiful. He taught the use of the pen, taught man what he did not know. These are the first 5 ayat to be revealed. But right after, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. Now, we need to understand 2 points in the first part. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق. Read in the name of your Lord who created man of cloth. That doesn't sound very honorable. But the honor comes right after when Allah says, عَلَّمَ الْإِنسَانَ مَا لَمْ يَعْلَمْ. Allah taught man what he did not know. This is where you get your honor from. Allah gave you the faculty of reasoning, gave you the ability to talk and understand, and now you're honorable. In the Quranic argumentation, in the Quranic way of argumentation, when a blessing is mentioned, you're expected to be shakir, to be grateful, right? So it says right after, كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Man transgress all bounds when they think that they are all sufficient. This is someone who was ungrateful to the blessing of knowledge. And he used knowledge to transgress. He used knowledge to be away from Allah. Even though knowledge was given to you and the ability to think was given to you, so you can easily know Allah and recognize Allah and love Allah and connect with Allah. By the way, this ayah, it's impossible that this ayah was revealed right away after the first 5 ayat. There could be few years between the first 5 ayat and the ayat right after. It talks about someone who's completely denying the faith, arrogant and doing ta'zeeb and justifying Muslims. So this was revealed later. But even though it was revealed later, as Imam al-Zarkashi said, it is designed according to the hikmah. It perfectly and topically fits. So what is the relationship between كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى and the first one? The first one is a blessing of Allah that you are a knowing human being. You should be grateful to this idea of knowledge. And someone is using knowledge to stay away from the deen. But the end of the ayah says, what should be your immediate and your right reaction? كَلَّا لَا تُطِعْهُ وَاسْجُدْ وَاقْتَرِبْ. Do not obey them, prostrate and come near. This last ayah should be the right response to the first 5 ayat. What is in between is the wrong response. See how the Quran is beautifully designed? Some people say the surah is disjointed and how come and why is this? But if you see the surah as argumentation, it's so beautiful and it makes perfect sense. But try to analyze it more and think about it deeply. These are the words of Allah. It requires tadabbur. It requires contemplation. So I thought of this as a good end because it tells us our appropriate response to knowledge. Allah gave you knowledge that should lead to more closeness to Allah, not the other way around. Allah yazikumul khair. So any questions?
Jazakallahu Khair, Shaykh. MashaAllah, you covered so much for us in such a short amount of time. Inshallah, we'll now move on to the Q&A. The Slido code will be projected here, so you can use it to ask your questions. The code is the same as the one we've been using. Just 1 second. So the code is up now. The code is 1491602. You can put your questions there and inshallah we can ask them from here. Sheikh, for those who may not have understood clearly, can you explain briefly the concept of iftiqar?
Subhanallah, I was thinking about this and I was saying I should have added something about iftiqar. And that question came. Okay, iftiqar. Let me picture this. Picture this. A baby that his mom is changing his diapers and taking care of him, and that baby is helpless. This is iftiqar. Someone is taking care of you. Now, Just because Allah made you able to take care of yourself does not mean you cease to have iftiqar. You're still the same human being. This is what I wanted to add. So picture this, you're that child who is helpless. Without Allah, you cannot be here. Without Allah, you cannot continue to survive. The word iftiqar comes from the word faqr. Faqr means poverty. Faqr means poverty. And in Arabic, it comes, Allah yardalik. It's fine. You know what why the word faqr means poverty? The word faqr means, I have back pain, and that illustrates faqr. You know, faqar al-dhahr, the spine is related to faqr. It comes from the same root. When it is broken, you're helpless. That is why the word poverty means lack of the means to survive. You cannot take care of yourself because you're faqir. Your back is hurt. You cannot move. This is the root of the word faqr. It comes from broken back. So developing iftiqar is essential for us spiritually. As I said, do not be distracted by your skills from experiencing iftiqar. You're like the same baby who's helpless, but the only thing is that Allah gave you some blessings that you should be grateful for, not to forget your iftiqar. And Imam Ibn Ata'illah said, sometimes you get sick, so you remember your essential nature. So that is why when you if someone got sick and they are really trained in this, they experience iftiqar and they grow higher. Actually, iftiqar could be expanded to help you grow spiritually. You know, sometimes iftiqar could be energized by sins. Someone could commit a sin and they feel helpless. That emotion could actually be a foundation for spiritual growth if you really can take care of it. Ibn Ata'illah also said, معصية أورثت ذلا وانكسارا خير من طاعة أورثت عزا واستكبارا. A sin that leads to humility and brokenness is better than an act of worship that leads to arrogance and pride. So if someone sinned, you can experience your iftiqar and turn back to Allah. In this way, sin will not keep you away from Allah. It will push you back to Allah. Why? Because you're experiencing this idea of iftiqar. You believe you're not perfect. You're not expected to be perfect. You will never be perfect. The idea of perfectionism is crazy when it comes to spiritual growth. But when you always consider iftiqar and you do not rely on your deeds and you rely on the fadl of Allah, if you fall, you will rise up right away. He said also, من علامة الاعتماد على العمل نقصان الرجاء عند وجود الزلل. One of the signs of relying on your deeds is giving up when you sin. This is a sign of relying. If you really rely on Allah, you will rise up and connect with Al-Ghafur right away. So that is why I told you, Al-Hikam is a book on Tawheed. Al-Hikam is a book on Tawheed, meaning the spiritual implications of Tawheed and how it can help us develop genuine faith, mature faith. Hikam is about developing mature faith. I hope the idea of iftiqar is clear. One way of developing iftiqar is siyam, fasting. When you feel hungry, it's fine. As long as you're health-wise fine, khalas, feeling hungry is fine. It reminds you of who you are. And when you experience iftiqar, you remember Allah's izzah, Allah's absolute sovereignty. Wallahu a'lam.
Sheikh, would you recommend reading the introduction of Imam Ghazali's book? Which book would you recommend? Are there other books you would recommend?
Now, I love the Hikam. I taught the Hikam many times, and I'm working on a manuscript on the Hikam to get it published, inshallah. It's not published yet, still in manuscript. The Hikam is a great resource for developing genuine faith, mature faith. And Imam al-Ghazali's, when it comes to Aqidah, I would recommend moderation of belief, al-iqtisad fil i'tiqad, and the introduction to his Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence to the philosophers. Read it carefully, and you will see that it resonates with a lot of the challenges our youth are going through. When they compare, when they mix between scientific accurateness and theological accurateness when it comes to non-Muslims. It really discusses this idea. Now.
Shukran. Inshallah, we can add those to the description of the video once it is finalized. Another question related to AI is, we have something that seems so powerful, so amazing. For many of us, we may not understand how it works, but it seems like it's able to do things that we never thought was possible. What can Muslims do to avoid being taken in by this idea that maybe AI is something beyond religion?
Beyond religion? No, I think it is still, there is great work ahead of us, but I would say Brother Muhammad al-Ansari was giving an excellent talk in Mecca Center about the challenges and opportunities of artificial intelligence. And I concluded the class with, we need to make sure, he suggested that we need to be proactive in immunizing our kids and giving them the right perspectives. And I concluded with, we need to equip them morally and theologically before they use these tools. It will become a tool that many Muslims will be tempted to be using. So we need to make sure that they are equipped morally and theologically. One of the ways I was very concerned about is someone, I don't know if it still exists or not, a website that has all of the ahadith and then seek your fatwa from the ahadith. This style is really dangerous. It's really dangerous because the hadith were available for all the madhahib. The problem was not about the hadith. The problem was about the understanding of the hadith and how to reconcile it with some other hadith. It's not as simple as give me a hadith and from the hadith I know the fatwa. The hadith is like the raw material, and there are 4 schools of thought, the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Maliki, and they develop their way of legal reasoning. So you cannot get the legal reasoning just from picking on the hadith. So we need to make our kids aware of the challenges. And sometimes we could be making we could be making a lot of mistakes when we're not morally and theologically equipped. So this is one of the things I was concerned about when I heard about it.
Sorry, Sheikh, you mentioned briefly fiqh, but there's another wave of Muslims who maybe are wondering, we hear about atheism, agnosticism. Does Islam really have an answer to these questions? Is the problem that there are no answers to these questions, the theological ones, or is it a lack of founding in those sciences?
I am completely, thank you for all of these questions. I am completely engaged in these questions about atheism. So I am completely aware of all of these modern questions. And I can say with absolute confidence, I have never encountered a modern question that I do not find its answer in the medieval works. Wallahi, I have not seen that. But I mean, if you're trained theologically, you have great foundations, not just to answer these questions, but to engage in a really intellectual and cohesive way. So I would encourage a Nasafiyya. If a Nasafiyya is taught in a modern way, it can answer all of these questions. As I told you, a Nasafiyya starts with a few sentences about, and these few sentences are now to be called epistemology. How do we know things? He said, أسباب العلم للخلق ثلاثة. Right? الحس والعقل والخبر. There are 3 sources of knowledge: the senses, the intellect, and the report. And he talks about the conditions for each one of these to be valid. So when our kids are deeply rooted in the tradition, it will immunize them from most of these challenges. And for atheism, we talked about fitrah. Let me add something. I shared it with someone who came to my office, and he was asking me very provoking questions. And he was answered very quietly and confidently. I was not irritated by these questions. I am used with these questions since I was in high school studying classical texts. So, عادي, it's fine. After he left, he sent me a message and he said, Ya Shaykh, when I entered your room, I was an atheist. When I left, I had faith. So sometimes when you're imam, do not belittle these questions, do not attack, welcome these questions. And this is what I always do. Wow, this is a great question. Because I believe that these questions are opportunities to build real faith. The other kids who do not question, I do not know really about the level of their faith. But that person who asks questions and gets satisfied answers, he will have really unshakable faith. So when it comes to atheism, let me give you that hint. Does God exist? Okay, let me ask a different question. What does it mean if God does not change, if God does not exist? You will find out, if you really think about this question, that there is something in you that says God must exist. And this is the best way to strengthen faith, is to let the audience get the answers from their hearts. And this is the Quranic way. So what does it mean if God does not exist? Does it mean, mashallah, you're smart, so you believe that God does not exist? The same problem Al-Ghazali was dealing with? No. If God does not exist, that means one thing. That means everything we have in this world are just chemical reactions between atoms that has no meaning, no purpose, no value. Even your brain have to be reduced. If there is no God, your brain that you're using to deny God are just chemical reactions between atoms that has no meaning. Because your brain, if God does not change, it does not exist, your brain is not designed to think. If God does not exist, your brain is not designed to think. And if your brain is not designed to think, how could you trust it? How could you trust it? I asked these questions to a girl that abandoned her and left her home and abandoned her family and became atheist for years. And I had these weekly discussions with her until she came back and her husband embraces Islam. The point is, the deen is very much based on rational foundations. If God does not exist, then we're talking about nothing. If you really think that your thinking means something, you must assume that there must be God. If you tell me this brain is designed to think, but there is no designer, I can say, Wallahi, sorry, I cannot continue that conversation. Because this is illogical. This is illogical. I cannot continue that conversation. If you believe it is designed to think, it must have a designer. If you believe it is not designed to think, then what you're thinking is useless. What you're thinking about is useless. And if an atheist tells you this is beautiful, it is deceptive. Because for something to be beautiful, if you say, wow, this sunrise is beautiful, if you're atheist, you can never say that. If you can say this sunrise is beautiful, you can never be an atheist. Why? Because if this is beautiful, it must have been designed, it must be designed to communicate beauty. And you recognized it. But if it was not designed to communicate beauty, then it is all illusion and deception. An atheist cannot say to his wife, you're beautiful. That is by accident. That is chemical reactions between atoms, and it is not designed to communicate beauty. That is all illusion. So this is the problem. It is illogical. And this is what I meant by saying faith is fitra. Fitra comes from the word fatara, which means to create. So we're hardwired to believe. If we cease believing, there is a problem. It is against our nature. That is why the prophets did not come to people and say, worship. No, they didn't say worship. They said worship Allah. Because those people were worshiping something or someone else. They were worshiping trees, stars, fire. So they made just the wrong conclusion. And the job of the prophets was to tell people, worship Allah alone. It was making that twist. So the idea of atheism is intellectual suicide. It is intellectual suicide. So you can never be an atheist and be consistent in your values in life, because there will be no values. I mean, if someone hit you, that is chemical reactions. Why should I be responsible for this? Why do you have to sue me for this? It has, and you know what? There are many atheists who are saying, fine, if abortion of a 3-year-old daughter can never be proved wrong except on religious terms. So they go that extreme. And many people say we're not literally free. I don't want to mention some of the atheist works that advocate that, because it may not be the right thing to do now.
شكرا جزيلا جزاك خير الشيخ.
You get angry ولا؟
Alhamdulillah. We're very grateful to have you with us. Unfortunately, the sad news is we were hoping maybe you could continue. We have Salat al-Dhuhr in a few minutes. Final announcements so that people are aware. So many of the questions will be addressed later in the retreat. I'm just saying this because we see them on our ends. Questions about sentience, can AI become alive? How would we deal with that? Maulana Tahseen will be addressing today.